Mr. Kenney, thanks for taking some time to talk to us. You made a compelling case earlier this week about why Alberta and Edmonton specifically could be one of the safest places for the National Hockey League to resume its playoffs. What would your case be to the average Albertan, whether they're a hockey fan or not, about why this is an important thing and a good idea at this time?
You know, it's been a super tough year in Alberta. I don't need to tell Albertans that for so many reasons. And I think this would just be a great symbol of Alberta coming back. We are a province of optimists, and we need some symbols of optimism. And I just think winning that bid would be part of that. Also, by the time that we'd be looking at the summer NHL season, and we'll be even further into our relaunch, and I think it might make a lot of sense as we sequence into more and more openness. And thirdly, we are going to need to put the paddles to this economy to get it really going again. And one of the industries that has been hit hardest is tourism. I can't imagine a better way to help boost our relaunch of Alberta's amazing tourism industry than to have tens of millions of people across North America and around the world watching professional hockey restart here in Edmonton, Alberta. So I think it would be a great brand boost for the province that would lead to tourism, jobs, and economic growth down the line.
What have your conversations been like with the National Hockey League? And I know you're planning another one at some time in the coming days. And with Mr. Bettman about this region, and what has your pitch been?
Well, first of all, I don't think they could, their main focus, in my view, should be the safety of the players and people who are involved. And there is no safer place in North America to do this than Edmonton. Edmonton has the lowest level of COVID-19 infections of any major city in North America, certainly lower than any other NHL city. We've had over the past week, I think a couple, maybe two new confirmed cases, 50 active cases in the city of over 1 million. And I think we're down to, I think it's like 6 people in hospital in Edmonton with COVID-19, with hundreds of acute care beds that have been set aside. We have the highest ratio per capita number of COVID-19 tests being done anywhere in the world in terms of a place with a large population. And so we have performed extraordinarily well on the public health side, particularly Edmonton. We've had some more challenges in Calgary, but in Edmonton, there's just no safer place. And plus, the facility is just like it was purpose-built for this strange scenario. You've got the most modern, newest, high-tech rink in the NHL, which was voted, I think, the second best ice surface by the NHL Players Association. They voted it having the best visitor team experience in the entire league. And it also has attached to it another NHL-sized ice surface in the community rink, all of this in an enclosed area, attached to a brand new 5-star hotel and another hotel, to between them 650 rooms. I mean, you've got all of the facilities you need and 2 ice surfaces in an area that you can cordon off into basically a virtual quarantine zone. So, I mean, I just cannot imagine any other city having that perfect purpose-built kind of infrastructure to support the league.
Alberta Health monitoring the way that they're testing everybody that's inside this bubble of safety. How much convincing does it take for you guys to be comfortable that the bubble they want to create will create a safe enough environment to allow this to happen in terms of the rest of the general population not being at risk at all?
We've been looking at this now for a month, and we've involved our Chief Medical Officer of Health, the Health Ministry, Alberta Health Services, and all of the other relevant agencies, and working also with the City of Edmonton, and of course the Oilers that have been coordinating all of this. And yeah, we're very confident about that. Now, let me just say, there is one question people are asking about is the Canadian requirement that we also have in Alberta's rules that people traveling here from outside the country have to isolate for 14 days. And in our views, we can create an isolation zone for all those travelers coming in to participate in the NHL playoffs. And that would satisfy the requirement. We would make sure all of that's monitored by Alberta Health Services. But after those 14 days, if the league or the team wanted to use other facilities, or you know, because if some guys are going to be locked up in a hotel room for 6 or 7 weeks, they may want to be able to get out. I mean, after those 14 days, people could do that. Like this, we're could do it safely, especially if they're being frequently tested.
Do you mean being mixed with the general public?
Yeah.
Or do you mean that would be included in the bubble, the quarantine bubble, essentially, that they'd be operating in? Like, would you have NHL players on a golf course with the general public?
Listen, if international travelers have met the 14-day isolation requirement and they are not symptomatic, and especially if they've been tested and test negative, after 14 days, they're not in sort of a permanent lockdown situation. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter whether they're NHL or non-NHL. They're welcome to participate in other things that are open and active in the Alberta economy, and golf course would be an example of that.
So whether that possibility exists within the NHL structure, though,
right? They might choose. They might choose because they want to take an absolute zero risk approach. They might want to just choose to maintain a sanitary cordon around those facilities. That would be their choice. All I'm telling you is from an Alberta and Canadian legal perspective, after the 14 days, especially if they've tested negative and they're not symptomatic, they're free like anybody else to participate in whatever else is going on.
One of the potentials, and I think we all know you could what if this thing right off the table.
For sure.
But one of the ones that I think has to be considered is what happens if, once competition has begun, a positive test happens with a player on a roster. So player tests positive at 8 in the morning, the rest of his team needs to get on the ice that night at 7:30. Based on your public health orders, people who come into contact with someone who's known to have tested positive need to self-isolate for 14 days. That won't be an option within the context of a 3-week or a month-long tournament.
Sure.
What's the contingency plan in the event of positive tests?
Well, first of all, you're quite right, anybody who tests positive has to go into a self-isolation for 14 days. And obviously, in that case, that would mean not in a zone, but they individually have to go into a hotel room for 14 days in that case, and unless they're symptomatic and sick. But I think the chances, just what we know about this virus, is that the chances of a very healthy athlete in their 20s becoming severely ill from this are tiny probability of that. Secondly, I assume that in that situation we'd require testing of everybody else that they've been in close contact with. And if the league is doing that constantly anyway, then they're on top of it.
We've seen a few other sports take some steps forward. Bundesliga soccer in Germany, although they did have some positive tests among their Tier 2 teams. Premier League is looking to take some steps forward. They too had some positive tests. UFC had an event where one of their fighters and a couple of trainers tested positive. They went forward with the event. Do you, as the provincial health authority, reserve the right to, if the brakes need to be pumped on this, even if it's midstream, you still have the right to do that and the full ability to do that? And what kind of public pressure does that potentially come with?
Boy, you're really getting into lots of hypotheticals here. Look, obviously, we have, as long as we have a pandemic situation, we do have the authority to intervene with extraordinary measures, as we've done already. And so if there was to be a widespread outbreak while the NHL is here because of their presence, then action might have to be taken. But that would be true wherever they play. And I think they understand that. Like I said, if you want to go to a zero risk approach, you know what? We can do that. The only way we do it is to shut pretty much everything down, and indefinitely. And I just don't think that's realistic. And I don't think that's what the life that people want to live. I mean, how do you get to zero risk on car accidents? You don't let anybody get in a car. So how do you get to zero risk on alcoholism? You have prohibition. How did that work out? So I know what I'm trying to say is we don't live in a zero risk world. We live in a world where we make intelligent risk judgments, manage the risks, and that's how we would do that here.
There is talk that from a competitive balance standpoint, it wouldn't be fair for the Edmonton Oilers to be able to play in their own building, be in their own locker room, be on their own ice. That would give them a measure of home ice advantage. There's a bit of a push for this from some other teams. Would this still make sense to you if the Edmonton Oilers and potentially the Calgary Flames couldn't play their games in Alberta?
Well, I guess the only way to solve that problem for the league is to make sure they don't play in Toronto, because they're never in the playoffs. I'm just kidding, but I don't think you can punish good teams. Like, this is just, here's the reality. I would say this to the NHL. They darn well better choose at least one Canadian city, because Canada is I know there's a big market in the U.S., but this is the heart and soul of hockey. And I would say that's especially true of the Canadian prairies. And Edmonton just has that vibe of hockey town. And I just think it would be a wonderful recognition of this tough, hardworking northern city that has done so much for the league, so much for the sport of hockey, to recognize that. Because, it has that history, that identity. On top of that, it has the best facilities in the league, and it happens to be situated in the province with one of the best public health performances in the world dealing with the pandemic. I think the decision is obvious.
Just a quick question, if I can, on the potential for people in the stands at some point in the coming months. And I know it's difficult in this moment to project too far out, but the CFL is hoping to start its season sometime around September. Their model requires fans to be in the seats for their financial model to work. Do you have any sense of what kind of a timeline you're working on for people to be able to buy tickets and go watch a sporting event?
Well, we'll know a little bit later in the summer, obviously. So our current target date for phase 2 of our relaunch is June the 19th. And I would expect at that point that we'll see the limit on the number of people who can gather indoors with physical distancing requirements will go from 15 to a much higher number. We've gone to 50 for outdoors. And then I think it will go higher in phase 3. I don't think we're likely in a scenario to see 18,000 people sitting jammed in next to one another in the next few months. And as you know, pretty much every major event of that nature, concerts, sporting events, the Olympics, have been canceled or postponed for the next few months. But let me put it this way. If the numbers continue to go in the right direction in this province, and we get really down to effectively virtually no or no community spread, then I think our public health officials are going to say that we can start going, at some point, perhaps potentially later this year, back to something more like normal in terms of large events. But right now, people should not be planning for that.
Mr. Kenney, thanks so much for making some time for us today, and good luck as things progress.
Appreciate it.